guys, welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be talking about that little voice inside our heads that keeps so many of us from tapping into our creative potential, and that is the inner critic. I want to talk about how the inner critic tends to show up for us as neurodivergent, multi-passionate women of color creatives who tend to already feel different and often misunderstood. So it's time that we take a closer look at how this might be impacting your ability to create and ways that you can work around this so that you can experience more ease and confidence when exploring your creativity. Personally, I'm really familiar with the inner critic. I have dealt with it for many years, and it's something that has not only impacted my creativity, but also my day to day life. For example, I never felt good enough when it came to some of the most ordinary things like choosing how to spend my day, thinking about the clothes that I wanted to wear or the food that I wanted to eat. I always felt like I was doing something wrong or doing things the wrong way or the way that not the way that people expected me to do them. And so this always made me feel down on myself. So if this sounds interesting to you, please keep listening or watching if you're on YouTube. Get cozy, get your snacks, and let's get into it. So let's talk about some of the common ways that the inner critic shows up for us. You might be struggling to make decisions. Does this sound familiar? Do you feel like you second guess yourself? You are constantly questioning and wondering if you're actually any good at evaluating people or judging situations. You worry about how your decisions might be perceived by others. So this keeps you paralyzed and you're stuck, unable to make a decision. Or what about feeling like everyone else knows more than you do? For example, are you constantly comparing yourself to others? It's like everyone got the manual for how to do life and you didn't. They know just the right things to say and how to behave in social situations. And I think this one really hits hard, especially as neurodivergent people, because a lot of us do struggle reading social cues, or maybe we struggle with social anxiety. So these are some truths, but also when we're surrounded by neurotypical people, we might feel even more different than usual. And so this makes us feel inadequate or really stressed out whenever we are um, outside of our routine or in unfamiliar situations. Or maybe you have really high expectations of yourself. You think that you should be able to do all the things and do them flawlessly. Anything less than perfect feels like a complete failure to you. So you tend to overcommit. You say yes to everything. And you always feel guilty and busy out of obligation. And you worry about disappointing yourself and others. So, what is the inner critic? The inner critic tends to be this harsh voice inside our heads that fills us with self doubt, with judgment, and negativity. It's like it's a constant voice that is judging you in everything that you say, that you think, that you do. It's like you always have to put yourself down before other people get to it. This often stems from early experiences in our lives. For example, maybe you grew up with really critical and controlling parents, or you had a lot of authority figures around you who treated you very harshly and who thought that by criticizing you, that they were motivating you so that you could strive to be better. But this can also originate from society's expectations and just personal beliefs that we have. For example, you might think that working really hard to get to the top is the way to go, or maybe feel like you always have to be available for others, even if it's at the expense of your own well-being. And then there's the additional and unique pressures that come with being a marginalized creative. For example, you might be the first in your family or your community to have been able to achieve a big milestone like graduating college or working in a corporate environment. So it feels that although you should be really happy and celebrating this opportunity, you're secretly also worrying about everything that you don't know and how you're going to figure it out. Or this can also look like being the only POC in the room, which automatically makes you feel like you're the odd one out. So naturally, this makes you wonder if you're actually qualified, or you wonder why you're the only one in the room that looks like you. Or what about loving doing a bunch of different things and constantly being told that if you can't focus on one thing, you're a jack of all trades and a master of none. So this makes you feel completely insecure, and you wonder, when are you going to finally be able to put your head down and pick the one thing that you're supposed to like? As you can see, the inner critic can be triggered by so many different types of things and situations, and it can be very debilitating. Now, let's explore a little bit of how the inner critic might be impacting your creative potential. For example, the inner critic might make you feel afraid of making mistakes. So, in our effort to be the absolute best, we hold ourselves back from exploring creatively because we don't want to do anything wrong. We don't want to make mistakes, and we feel that if we do make a mistake or things don't go the way that we planned them, that it was a complete waste of time. Another way that the inner critic impacts our creativity is by keeping us stuck in perfectionism. And this might look like never creating anything at all because we are too afraid of not having the right tools, of not having the right space or environment to be able to create in. We are waiting for everything to be perfect before we can sit down to create. Or we don't finish projects because we think that if they're not turning out great as we're working on them, then we should just throw them away because what's the point? But we aren't giving ourselves a chance to develop that work before we are judging it. And the inner critic also keeps us from developing our unique voice and our unique point of view because we are too focused on what other people are doing and what's getting likes and approval from the outside world. So we copy them and we avoid doing the work of exploring what truly calls us because we just want to get that validation and we are too afraid to go outside of that box. As you can see, if we don't stay vigilant, this critical voice is going to take over and destroy our creative efforts. So, what can we do? I want to share with you 3 simple strategies that you can start implementing to work with your inner critic, because I believe that we never truly get rid of the critic. We just have to learn how to work with it, because I think setting ourselves up for these expectations that we're going to conquer it is just not realistic, and we don't want to disappoint ourselves by putting that in our heads. So I think it's more realistic to learn to work with it. So the first tip that I have for you is to create an inventory of all the positive qualities that you have and refer to it often. As you have been hearing me talk, we tend to focus a lot on the negatives, and this is also like a natural psychological thing that humans do. We just focus on the negative. So it takes intentional effort to break that pattern and focus on the positive. And we can do this by writing it down. It might feel weird at first to list out all the things that make you a great person because you might not be used to it. But believe me, once you start doing it and you start to get more and more comfortable with that side of yourself, you start to embrace it and you start to realize that not everything is bad about you. And I think this is such a nice list to refer to over and over. Even once you have it under control, it's always such a nice reminder of the things that make us who we are. Tip number 2 is to remind yourself that the inner critic is not your true self. Like I talked about earlier, the inner critic often develops out of all the messaging we have heard growing up and throughout our lives from people who criticized us, who were harsh with us, who didn't have a whole lot of patience. And so it's important to interrupt this cycle by thinking about all the things that we are good at. So if your inner voice is telling you, you suck at learning, you're so slow, remind yourself of all the times that you have been able to learn something and that you have even gone above and beyond the thing that you thought you couldn't do. This is a great way to take your power back and to start to shape the way that you want to live your life. Tip number 3 is to replace any negative thoughts with more empowering ones. So whenever you find yourself judging, criticizing, putting yourself down, shift towards a more neutral or empowering tone. For example, a critical thought around painting might sound something like this. What's the point of painting if I'm not good at this? There's so many more better painters out there than me. Now, a more neutral thought can sound something like, I'm interested in painting. I want to try this new thing. I want to see if I can learn. Or a more empowering thought can sound something like, I'm interested in painting. I want to try this, and I'm going to give myself a chance to learn before I say it's not for me. As you can see, shifting the way that we talk to ourselves can transform our creative practice. In summary, the inner critic is something that a lot of people struggle with. You are not the only one. And you don't have to let it hold you back. In fact, you can shift this negative voice into a more empowering one so that you can be your most creative and fabulous self. We have come to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around. And if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you're watching on YouTube, and share it with other creative baddies that you think can benefit from this show. And until next time, be kind to yourself, keep showing up, and stay creative. I will talk to you soon. Bye.